confidence disappeared after being made redundant last year. How do I build it back without pretending that I'm okay? You don't have to be positive, because you don't have to wake up every morning saying everything happens for a reason. But here's the thing, you can have all those emotions and still move forward. People think emotional acceptance is about liking what's happened to you. That's not what acceptance means. Acceptance means I want you to make one small promise to yourself each day, and then I want you to keep it. Because very often the reason we don't have confidence in ourselves is because we become somebody that we're not sure we can rely on, we can trust. Because people start thinking, once I feel confident, I'll start taking those risks. But unfortunately, confidence doesn't work that way. You build confidence by repeatedly showing yourself, I can do difficult things, because you don't think your way into being confident. You act your way into evidence. So I want you to write down 3 lists. Number 1. Hello, I'm Johnny Lawrence, and I'm coming to you on another very hot Wednesday here in the UK. Now, I am not complaining. You will not hear me complaining. What I will say, though, is don't judge me. If beads of sweat start running down my head and you start seeing sweat patches on my t-shirt, that's probably going to happen, to be completely honest. So I'm preparing for you. I can already feel how clammy I feel already. Anyway, too much information perhaps, but today, I'm going to be answering another listener's question, specifically from Mark, who is 47 years old and is from Leeds. And he asks, my confidence disappeared after being made redundant last year. How do I build it back without pretending that I'm okay? Mark, I think there's something really, really important that I'd like to highlight about the way that you phrase that question. You don't want to pretend that you're okay. Good. That's really commendable. It really is. And if I'm honest with you, you've done a large amount of the work that might be required to answer this question. And I just want to take a moment to congratulate you on that and just to say that you made a strong stuff, Mark. Because the truth of it is, I don't think confidence comes from trying to convince yourself that everything is okay and that you're fine, especially when you're not. Because being made redundant can knock you in ways that goes far beyond the idea that you're just losing your job. You actually lose a hell of a lot more than just your job. You lose your routine, your financial security, your sense of purpose, your status, your identity, and very often your belief in yourself. And sometimes the hardest part is the story you start telling yourself afterwards. Maybe you start thinking, maybe I'm not good enough anymore. Maybe I'm past it. Maybe nobody wants me. And that's where the real damage to your confidence can happen. You start to spiral. You start to connect this event in your life to your identity. So what I'm going to do here is what I tend to always do, is I'm going to make a few points that I'd like to highlight, and then I'm going to try and give you some practical things to do to make you feel like you're doing something about it, which is always a nice feeling, right? So the first thing I want to say is that your job is not your identity. This is definitely the first thing that I want to explore and potentially challenge, because I want you to hear this, Mark. Yes, you lost your job, but you did not lose your worth. When we spend 10, 20, 30 years building our identity around our career, at some point those two things can become very difficult to separate. You probably stop saying that you work in this industry and you start unconsciously thinking that that's who you are. So when the job disappears, it feels like a part of you has disappeared. But your job was something that you did. It was never who you were. Another way to look at it is redundancy changed your circumstances, but it doesn't get to define your identity. And that is a very important distinction, something that's worth taking a moment to acknowledge. I can imagine it lands with you in a real prickly kind of, you want to reject it kind of way. You might even think it's a bit woo-woo, but it is true. Because if your confidence depends on your circumstances going a certain way, then it becomes incredibly fragile. Because real confidence, I promise you, real confidence is built on something a lot deeper. Another thing I want to say is that confidence isn't something that you wait for. I can already hear you going, oh man, what? But truth is, I think this is where people actually get it a little bit backwards, for understandable reasons. Because people start thinking, once I feel confident, I'll start applying for jobs. Once I feel confident, I'll start putting myself out there. Once I feel confident, I'll start taking those risks. But unfortunately, confidence generally doesn't work that way. You build confidence by repeatedly showing yourself, I can handle this. I can survive this. I can do difficult things. I can take a knock and keep going, because you don't think your way into being confident. You act your way into evidence. You see, confidence is the reputation that you build with yourself. It's the idea that when you say you're going to do something, you do it. You're building trust. You're building confidence. You're building reliability. You're building a reputation with yourself that says, when I say stuff, I do it. And it's kind of got nothing to do with whether you succeed or not. Very often you see confident people that kind of aren't very good at singing or kind of aren't very good at the sport they're playing. But for some reason you're enamored with them because they're so confident. It's a trait that people often admire, and then they mistake that admiration of that trait for being an admiration of that person, which is very, very easy to do, even when you know you're doing it. Another thing I want to bring up is try hard, really hard, not to turn a setback into a verdict, because there's a massive difference between I lost my job and I lost my job because I'm no longer good enough. The first one is an event. The second is an interpretation. And this is absolutely where our thinking can make a difficult situation significantly worse. Something happened, then we create a story about what that something means. And if you keep repeating that story enough times, it starts to feel like an actual fact. So Mark, I'd love to encourage you to separate what actually happened from what you're making it mean about you, because those, I promise you, are two completely different things. And my fourth point, and I hope this actually offers you some relief, is you don't have to be positive. You can bin that. You don't have to be positive. Things don't feel very positive right now, I can imagine. And that's what makes this such an important thing for me to say. Because you don't have to wake up every morning saying everything happens for a reason, because maybe you're feeling anger. Maybe you're feeling embarrassed. Maybe you're feeling frightened, scared. Maybe you're grieving the life that you thought you had. And I want you to know, Mark, that is okay. That's absolutely okay. And if I'm honest with you, it's probably the right set of emotions. It's not wrong to feel sad when something sad happens. Just like it's not wrong to be happy when something really happy happens. Don't know if that's the way to say that, but yeah, I think you know what I mean. But here's the thing, you can have all those emotions and still move forward. You can be disappointed and still move forward. You can be scared and still take action. And to be honest, Mark, you can feel like crap and still do something constructive. Because a lot of time we have to accept our situations, and people think emotional acceptance is about liking what's happened to you. And I think that's a really impossible thing to ask in most situations, and will only end in amplifying how you feel, because now you've got a sense of failure too. Because that's not what acceptance means. Acceptance means this is where I am. I don't have to pretend it's different before I decide what I'm going to do next. The next thing I want to say is to start rebuilding confidence outside of your career or your job. Because if your entire sense of worth has been attached to your professional identity, then it's time to start deliberately building evidence of competence elsewhere in your life. And maybe that looks like getting physically fitter, learning something new, helping someone, being a good parent or a good partner, keeping promises to yourself. Doing something that you've been avoiding. Maybe you can volunteer, or you can just keep it simple and build something from scratch. It really doesn't have to be something overly ambitious, because confidence isn't just the idea that you're good at your job. A great deal of it is that you can trust yourself to figure out what to do next. That's so much more resilient. And the truth is, Mark, you will make some mistakes. You'll make some stumbles. You'll get things wrong. And that's all okay. Because we can take those things and we can say, that's what it means to be human. Because I promise you, anyone that you might be looking at right now that you admire, they've made so many mistakes, and perhaps they've worked really hard to cover them up, but they've definitely made some mistakes, and some big ones too. Because my next point will be, keep the promises you make to yourself. This is maybe the most important point I want to make. And I'd really like to extend this out to everyone else really that's listening, and not just you, Mark, and make it like almost like a little exercise for this week. Between now and next week's episode, I want you to make one small promise to yourself each day. And then I want you to keep it. Now make it a small thing. Try not to make it something like, I'm going to completely transform my life, because that's a big thing to do. Instead, make it something ridiculously achievable. Something like go for a 20-minute walk. I'll make that phone call. I'll spend 30 minutes applying for jobs. I'll go to the gym. I'll get to bed at a sensible time instead of watching endless episodes of my favourite show on Netflix. Bit of self-talk there. Because every time you keep a promise to yourself, you are you're actively building something that I'm not sure is not the most important thing when it comes to confidence and self-worth. You're building self-trust, because very often the reason we don't have confidence in ourselves is because we don't know what we're going to do. We become unpredictable in our own eyes. We become somebody that we're not sure we can rely on, we can trust. Think about that. Think about, I don't know, the idea that you set an unrealistic task, something like, I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go for a run when you haven't run for 2 years. The likeliness of you doing that is really, really low, especially at certain times of the year. So if you do that and your alarm goes off at, say, 3:45 and you decide, I'm not doing this, the first thing that you learn that day is that you cannot be trusted, that you are full of crap. And I don't know if that's a very good thing to learn about yourself at 3:45 in the morning. That cannot be the first thing you do in your day. And the truth is, you rack up a few moments, like if you do what I've asked this week, then you've got 7 days of reasons, of evidence why you can trust yourself. And honestly, I think self-trust is a much better foundation for confidence than just being positive or positive thinking. And don't get me wrong, I'm not encouraging you to be negative, but sometimes you're allowed to be a bit grumpy. You're allowed to be a bit tired. You're allowed to be not happy. It's all right. It's okay. And really the last point I want to make is, please, Mark, don't let rejection become confirmation. And this is really important when it comes to looking for jobs, because you're not always going to get the job that you apply for. That's just the way it is for everybody, because you might send out 30 applications and you might get 5 interviews and get rejected for 4. And that's when your brain starts going, see, I knew it, I'm not good enough. But here's the thing about rejection, it doesn't actually tell you anything about your worth. Because the truth is, the absolute truth is that sometimes you just wasn't the right candidate for the job. Sometimes somebody else just had more experience than you. Sometimes somebody internally was already lined up for the job. And sometimes there were 200 applicants, which is like quite a significant number. So here's the thing, practice. And practice removes the pressure of perfection. Instead of saying you're going to do this, practice it. And when you practice something, sometimes it means it doesn't quite go the way that you want it to go. But that's where we learn. Because what we're going to work on is not turning every rejection into evidence for a negative belief you already have about yourself. So now we're going to get practical. What can we do about this? There's some insights I've offered, some things, some thoughts that I had around this, Mark. But here's some stuff that you can do. Mark, I want you to write down 3 lists. Number 1, things that you've achieved. And I'm not just talking professionally. I'm talking about everything. All the way down to passing your driving test or getting a B on a test at school. Whatever it is that you are proud of that you did. Anything that you've achieved, I want you to write it down. Number 2, difficult things that you have survived. And this one's a really important one. Don't skip this one, because confidence isn't just about the things that you've achieved. It's also about the things that you've endured during your life. And now lastly, number 3, I want you to write things that you know how to do. And all of these will probably be quite hard. So when it comes down to things that you know how to do, I want you to think about skills, qualities, experiences, relationships, or any knowledge that you've gained about absolutely anything at all. And then I want you to stop and I want you to just look at this list, because the first thing to go when confidence disappears is our own self-evidence, because you don't necessarily need to create a new version of yourself. Perhaps you just need to remember the evidence of who you already are. Because my deeper point here, and it's probably something that I've spoken a lot about on other episodes, is that your circumstances are not your identity. Life is going to knock us around. Jobs will disappear. Relationships will end. People will reject us. Plans will just not work. Your body will change, and things don't always go according to plan. You see, the question isn't, how do I create a life where nothing knocks my confidence? Because that's impossible. I think a better question would be, how do I become somebody who can trust themselves to handle whatever happens? That's a much more powerful form of confidence. So Mark, my challenge for you for the next 7 days is to do one thing every day that makes you respect yourself slightly more. And what I'm not asking is for you to do something that impresses somebody else. I want it to be something that makes you think, good, I did that. Because confidence isn't built in one giant moment. It's built quietly. One decision, one action, one promise, one uncomfortable conversation, one small win at a time. And Mark, I think there's something else I want you to hear. You don't need to become the old version of yourself again. Maybe that's not the goal. Maybe this period of time is an opportunity to build a version of yourself whose confidence isn't dependent on a job title, a salary, or somebody else's decision about your value. You don't have to pretend you're okay. You don't have to pretend that you're not hurt. You don't have to pretend that you're confident. You just have to keep moving, because sometimes confidence doesn't come before the difficult periods. Sometimes you have to look back afterwards and realize that that was a period of time that taught me I could handle more than I thought I could. And I promise you, that kind of confidence, it's very difficult to take away from someone. And I suppose if I was to leave with a final reflection, it would be, if my job, income, and professional status disappeared tomorrow, what would still be true about who I am? Because your career can be part of your identity without being the measure for your identity. Thank you for listening today, and I'll see you next week for another episode.